So without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing Richard Steinitz. Richard, like his brother Michael, was born in New York City of German Jewish immigrant parents. He studied at the State University of New York in Buffalo and has been living in Israel since 1986. When not
No,
writing novels,
1968.
oh, I'm sorry, 1968. I inverted my numbers. I'm sorry. Has been living in Israel since 1968. When not writing novels, he reads them in great quantities and works for a multinational educational publisher. He and his wife, Naomi, good name, are the parents of two grown children who live in the States. And so Richard just recently published a new novel called Kaplan's Quest. And I'm really curious. He's going to tell you a little bit more about it. And I'm really curious to learn about the personal connections, how much is based on family connections or people you knew. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Richard. And before we begin, I should say that Richard is in Israel. So it's 2 o'clock in the morning for him. So we owe him a big debt of gratitude for still agreeing to do this, waking up, and give him a little leeway if he misses his words because he's tired. Thank you so much, Richard. Take it away.
Right, if I nod off in the middle, you'll know why. First of all, good evening. Thank you for coming virtually. I hope you will enjoy it. As Naomi said, I am the author of 3 books, actually. Why does the screen say Rose Ellis? Does everybody see me still? This is very strange. Anyhow.
Yeah, sorry, Richard, you're probably going to want to press speaker view, gallery view up at the top, then you'll be able to see all of us.
No, I am, but suddenly it said Rose Ellis. Okay. I've written 3 books, and the idea was that I would talk mainly about the second book called Kaplan's Quest. But first of all, okay, we keep switching faces here. My first book was a detective story called Murder Across the Border. It's a classic detective story. It's set in Israel and various other places, and it circles around the Oslo peace process way back when. The story is of an Israeli policeman who's doing army service even though he doesn't have to do it. And instead of watching the border and the Jordanians, he's watching the birds and the gazelles that are around the little outpost where he is. And in the midst of taking pictures of whatever it was up there, where he's sitting collapses and falls down the hill, and inadvertently, while he's falling, his camera takes a picture of what's happening on the other side of the border, and later on, he discovers that he took a picture of a murder happening. That's it in very, very short, and we can talk more about it later if anyone wants, but that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about Kaplan's Quest, which is my second book. And Kaplan's Quest is, well, let's put it this way. The first book was written in third person, which is what most novels are. He did this, they did that, that sort of thing. But for fun, or for a challenge more than fun, I decided I was going to write a book in first person. I did this, I did that, we did this. And Kaplan, it was just as a challenge, and it was quite difficult at the beginning because it's not the normal style that people write in. And you have to get used to, instead of saying so-and-so went down the street to buy a newspaper, I went down the street to buy a newspaper. The difference sounds minimal, but it takes a great deal of effort to get this moving. And on more than one occasion, I had to rewrite entire passages because I had suddenly drifted from the first person back to the third. The other really difficult part of writing a long story or novel is what the movie business calls continuity, when things have to stay as they are supposed to be or were in a previous passage. Filmmakers hire people just for this task to keep track of things and make sure they aren't silly mistakes, such as if a character is wearing a red shirt and in the next scene, which was done on a different day, but it's supposed to be a minute later, suddenly he's wearing a blue shirt. So you have to keep track of things like that. In my case, in one passage, I inadvertently used the hero's father's name instead of his own name. A very diligent and pedantic friend who read the book and noticed this, kept me from making a very unprofessional mistake. I've also written a third book called The Voyage of the Stingray. This is a thriller about submarines and secret landings and spies and stuff like that. Has a very small connection to Israel because it's about Iran and submarines, and so they sort of go together. Back to the subject at hand, Kaplan's Quest. In many ways, this too is a detective story. It's a voyage in search of family roots about an uncle who vanished during the Holocaust, excuse me, and a young student's journey of discovery to find out what happened to him. Excuse me. In Kaplan's Quest, I let my imagination and my own personal history and interest direct me. Much of the book revolves around Berlin, both pre-war and post-war, and during the war. And I allowed myself to use my own family history here. The house where the missing uncle lived in the book is the house where my paternal grandparents lived before they were deported to Theresienstadt, from where they never returned. I used other personal experiences again to form the book, one of which was the location and description of a place called Mont Saint-Michel, an enormous, amazing, and enchanted monastery in Normandy, France. I first read about Mont Saint-Michel when I was a very young person, about, I would imagine, 10 or 12. And I read a children's mystery about Mont Saint-Michel, and I became fascinated by it. And I was lucky enough to have visited the monastery when I was a young man in 1967, and I always wanted to write about it. So here I got the chance when I started writing the book. Now, to get you into the mood, I'd like to read a small section from the book. Uncle Samuel, as he was known in my immediate family, was an integral part of my childhood, even though I never knew him, and he was presumed to have been dead for many years already. He was actually my great uncle, and I was given his name, Shmuel. Shmuel is the Hebrew version of Samuel. Shmulik is the diminutive nickname. And from an early age, I heard stories of his athletic prowess and saw his picture prominently displayed in our house, dressed in his athletic gear. He had been a champion shot putter in the Maccabi Atzair, Young Maccabi's sports club in Berlin, had even taken part in the second Maccabi games in 1935 in Tel Aviv, and for some unfathomable reason, had returned to Berlin at the end of the games. My grandfather, Ethan Kaplan, Samuel's fraternal twin brother, had accompanied the Maccabi Hatzair team to Palestine as a journalist, but had chosen to stay and make his home in Jerusalem, where he met my grandmother, who was also from a German Jewish family. My grandfather and uncle's elder brother, Nathan Kaplan, left Germany already in 1934, having seen the way things were going, and having understood earlier than the rest of the family that it was time to get out. He had somehow managed to get an immigrant visa for Canada, though the Canadians were not very helpful about letting Jewish refugees in, to say the least, and went to live in Montreal. My great-grandparents, the parents of the three brothers, had both died in Theresienstadt, and we had Red Cross certificates to prove it. The contradictory character of the Yekim, as the German Jews who managed to escape the Holocaust are colloquially known in Israel, was well in evidence in our house. On one hand, no German-made products were ever bought, including cars. No one would ever travel to Germany unless forced to by circumstances. Government service was forgivable, business dealings were frowned upon, and no chance was ever missed at bad-mouthing the German people, dead or alive, or the present German government. On the other hand, the mother tongue in our house was German. Both my father and my mother were children of German immigrants, and the first language they knew and learned was German. It was only natural for them to speak German amongst themselves, especially as a way of communicating so that the children didn't understand what they were saying. We, my sister Naomi and I, learned a basic level of German at an early age in self-defense. Our family, and I dare say in most other German immigrant households, culture was considered a German monopoly. No one composed classical music of any value except for German composers. Goethe was the greatest writer in history, far better than Shakespeare or Tolstoy, with Schiller coming in a close second. And the German countryside was the earthly reflection of the Garden of Eden. This is how the book starts, with a presentation of the main character and the general atmosphere that pervades much of the book, and the raison d'etre, the reason for the story, why it all happens, what's behind it all. Our hero, Shmulik, despite his parents' opinion and opposition, goes off to Berlin for a summer of research. He's a master's student at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He's doing a master's on the history of Germany between the two world wars. The Germans have always had a fetish about order and record keeping. On one hand, this enables researchers to search various archives in Germany and in many cases find what they were looking for. On the other hand, this is ghoulish to an extreme, with minute details of the workings and results of the final solution. It also assists people in finding out about their relatives who were in the camps and who in most cases perished there. While doing research work for his master's thesis, he digresses and uses the various German archives, of which there are many, to try and find some trace or explanation for his Uncle Samuel's disappearance. His journey of roots searching and tracing the fate of his uncle or great uncle takes him through various parts of Germany, Berlin, the city of Göttingen, France, the monastery in Normandy, Mont Saint-Michel, back to Israel, to Canada, to Quebec, and in the end ends up back in Israel, to his parents' great delight. Both Murder Over the Border, my first book, and Kaplan's Quest have very definite connections to Israel and to being Jewish. Living in Israel gives you perspectives that many people don't have. History and politics are everywhere and are intertwined and affect everything that takes place here, for better or for worse. Now back to writing. Between you and me, I hate writing, the actual writing process. When I was a school pupil many, many years ago, I never received good grades on writing projects because what I wrote was always too short, too superficial. Back then, work was done with a pen or a pencil, and this was for me physically painful. The less I wrote, the less it hurt. So I was a minimalist pupil, and my grades reflected this. If I had owned a computer to write on in high school and at university, I would have received far better grades. The part of being an author that I really do love and enjoy is the research. And the internet has made this so easy. What I can do in a day today would have taken weeks or months at a university library. I can spend hours looking for some fact, and in the process going off on tangents and getting lost, forgetting about what I was looking for originally. I tend to dive into the details of stories, what a certain place looks like, what the street's name is, how this came to be and where it was and who it was. And I spend hours doing the research, and the result is a paragraph or two. But this is, you have to have fun with what you're doing, and this is the fun part. I am perhaps different from other authors in that when I start a process, a project, I have no idea where I'm going to go with it. There are authors who have the entire book they're writing mapped out before they start writing with a complete outline, and I envy them for their ability to do so. I start with an idea, even just a sentence or two, and go on from there. I often get to a point in the story, to a crossroads or a diversion, and have no idea what to do next. Sometimes I figure it out and move on, and able to go on writing the entire story. On other occasions, I can't figure it out. It just doesn't compute. And the story gets added to a growing collection of bits and pieces that I have on my computer that are sitting there waiting for me to have an epiphany and come back to them to finish the project. That's life. Now back to our hero Shmulik. Shmulik Kaplan is young, Jewish, and Israeli. He has no real religious affiliation, but he has great national and ethnic affiliation and a deep sense of history and cultural memory. His family's attitude towards Germany and anything German is very typical of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, when most people, especially those who came from Europe as survivors of the war or who were related to people that didn't survive and refused to have anything to do with anything German or Germany. Later on, as time passed, the reins of memory begin to loosen, and most people in Israel have become more relaxed about relations with the new Germany and anything connected to it. This has even reached the point where television ads for German products like Mercedes-Benz cars and Blaupunkt televisions and radios emphasize the fact that they are made in Germany. In the 40s and 50s, they would have ignored that fact. In the book, Shmulik and his Canadian cousin, Jack, the son of the third brother, Nathan, who immigrated to Canada, meet up over the summer. Jack is working at an archaeological dig at the monastery in Mont Saint-Michel. And through a strange coincidence, and all mysteries and thrillers are always solved by coincidence, he comes across evidence of the German occupation inside the monastery, where the German forces were forbidden to be. Sorry. Shmulik's archival searches and researches and Jack's digging at the monastery come together. And the two travel throughout Germany in search of clues of their uncle's disappearance. Here, once again, I drew upon my own personal experiences with descriptions of places I have visited. For example, the medieval town of Göttingen in Germany, a beautiful town that I knew and learned about through the good graces of my brother and sister-in-law, where I spent time with them. Canada also plays a part with a cameo appearance of the North Nova Scotia Highlanders, 3rd Division Army Unit, that fought in battles at Falaise in France near the monastery. Forgive me if I stop here about the actual story. If I tell you too much about it, you won't want to read the entire book. Why am I here? That is a very short synopsis of the book, why it was written, how it was written. Since we have time, I'll just throw in a few words about my third book, which is about a submarine and a new type of nuclear submarine, and a young MIT dropout civilian who works on the submarine's technology when it's still being built, ends up getting stuck on it when the submarine sails off. And you know what? Read the book. Somebody's trying to be shown there. That's about it. I think the best thing now is if Nomi will unmute everybody and open up the floor for questions, comments, and derisions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for giving us that overview, not only of the books that you've written, but a little bit of a window into your writing process.
Yeah.
Certainly, as someone who loves to read, but am not a writer myself, it's always interesting to get a little bit of a window into that process. So like Richard said, now we're going to open it up to questions. And Richard, if you're okay with it, I would love for people to ask in any of the different areas that Richard touched upon, so either about the novels themselves, about the family history, the research piece, or also about his writing process. Or if I may, Richard, we were chatting at the beginning a little bit just about life in Israel in general right now, and maybe even how that's reflecting on your current writing.
I'm okay with everything. And I just
wonderful.
I just remembered something that I thought would be nice to little note to add. The first book, Murder Over the Border, like everything, has a personal connection. I spent some army time at a tiny little outpost near what's called the triple border with Syria, Jordan, and Israel. And that little outpost, that, the little spot where he's looking at the flowers and the birds instead of the Jordanians, is where I sat doing similar activities. And when I finished my time up there, the place grabbed me. I mean, I really liked the place. I didn't like the service, but I liked the place. It was picturesque and curious and interesting. And it nagged me for years until I started writing it. And then it took me 7 years to write the book. At your service.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, I'll begin the questioning as always, and give everyone time to think of some questions they might have. So I guess my first question is, you base a lot of your writing on, it sounds like, family connections, especially in Kaplan's Quest. Where do you draw the line between fact and fiction? Like, where do you know or how do you know when to stop what's being based on, your own family history, and to go beyond that, while still having it seem somewhat authentic, as I think is the attempt?
I think the point where I stop is where I say, if I keep going here, I'm going to either embarrass somebody in the family, or, for lack of a better expression, give them some heartbreak. I don't want to make people miserable, especially not close members of my family. And I don't want to embarrass anybody. I'm not going to write about cousin so-and-so who was caught naked on the balcony. That's not my thing. I mean, there are writers that do, I'm sure. But there comes a point when you say, no, it's not kosher, for lack of a better expression.
Right. A second question, sort of a little bit of a divergence. You work in publishing, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't anymore. No.
Okay.
I was retired from publishing.
I'm wondering if
4 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that.
Right. I'm wondering if the experience of writing your own novels changed the way that you read novels, either from a leisure perspective or from a publishing perspective.
Well, the publishing business I was in was educational publishing.
Right.
It had nothing to do with novels, unfortunately. I don't think writing a book has changed my attitude to reading books, except that I'm even more pedantic about finding mistakes in other people's books, which I hate. But that's a family trait. I know the other guy does the same thing. I really get annoyed when authors make lazy mistakes. They can't be bothered to look up something and they write something which is wrong. Why? Again, with the internet, it's so easy to find out the right answers to your question. Why make up wrong answers?
Okay, thank you so much.
And authors make stupid, silly mistakes of language. They add a word of Hebrew or two. There are hundreds of thousands of Israelis scattered around the world. You can always find one to ask. Why be lazy or be, I don't know it all, and make silly mistakes? It really gets my goat.
Fair enough. Does anyone have any questions for Richard? Feel free to just unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand on the Zoom device and I'll get you. Erwin, go ahead.
Yes, Richard, have you ever met Daniel De Silva?
No, I haven't. And you know what? He gets top marks.
He's great.
I mean, not only about the story, but about getting the stuff right. I'd give him a 99 on that. He spends a lot of time doing really good research. And I can't not more than once or twice in a book is there something that is not 100% correct. And it's really very minor usually. He's really very good about the research. He writes great books. I love them. I wish I could sell books like he sells books. Man must be a multi-millionaire by now. But no, he's good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next question. Does anyone have? Joel, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Don't see anybody.
I guess I'm demuted now.
You're
Oh, there
demuted.
he is.
You said earlier, and I think I got it right, but correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't do any research on it in the last half hour. You said that when you were writing as a student, you would be reasonably terse, that you had trouble expanding on what you were writing. Is that what I understand correctly?
It wasn't, I don't think I ever got to the point of expanding. I was a lazy student. I will confess all my sins. I was a lazy student, A. I just wanted to get whatever that I was doing over and done with. And B, the actual physical process of holding a pen or a pencil and writing pages of text was a painful process for me. I don't know if it was something, a physical fault or it was, I don't know what it was, but I really had difficulty writing quantities of text, and my handwriting was god awful.
How did you get over that
In
order to write a novel? Because to write a novel, you have to write description and color and all of that sort of thing. You don't just say he said, but he said with a wink in his eye as he looked at, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, well,
how did you learn to do that?
I will tell you a funny little anecdote which explains a lot of it. Many, many years ago, I don't remember who told the anecdote, but it's very true, of the person who told it was a author's agent, a literary agent. This is probably in the 1980s, something like that. And she said that the minute she received a manuscript, and in those days you sent in, hard copy manuscripts, not computer files. The minute she received a manuscript that was over 300 pages long, she knew it was done on a computer.
She knew it
It was
was
done on a computer and not a typewriter.
right. Yeah.
And the point being that computers have made writing large quantities of texts so much easier. And I only began to write my first book on the day, the writing process, not thinking about it, but the writing process was on the day that I bought my first computer. It was a primitive, unbelievably primitive little laptop. It didn't run Windows, it didn't run DOS, it was with very strange screen of 4 lines of text only, but it was what I could afford at the time. And I bought it, and I began the next day to write my first book. And it just flowed because the process, you didn't have to think about the actual physical writing process. you could just, I mean, if you have a head like mine, you connect your brain to your fingers and it, you know, you think, all right, now I'm doing this and the characters, and the meantime, at the same time you're typing. It was a life changer. And I could never write another book by hand or by typewriter. No way.
But you had to have those ideas in your head, maybe even when you were writing by
Oh,
hand, but you were just too lazy to put it on paper.
exactly. Oh yeah. I mean, I wrote my first story when I was 6. I dictated it to my mother and she typed it out, and I still have it somewhere. I mean, a 6-year-old story. But sorry, the process became doable as soon as I had a computer. Up until that time, I could not have, produced anything of any length.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure I'm a representative author. I don't know what other guys have been through, other authors have been, but
Just as an aside on Irwin's comment about Daniel Silva, and
mm,
you're saying that he was 99% accurate with his research, as both of you know, and as anybody who's read particularly any of these crime, suspense, thriller novels, at the end there are always thank yous and credits and the whole bit.
mm,
And these guys thank about 2017 people for the effort that they've put into it.
yeah.
In correcting and all that sort of thing. But again, the author himself, herself, still has to do
Oh yeah.
part of that research for someone else then to look at and say, no, this is wrong. Or
I'll
yes.
tell you a funny story about that. When I wrote my third book, it's about a submarine, and I have a curious, strange affection for submarines. But I knew very little about them technically and about the military standards and behaviors and all this sort of stuff. But as I said, I did a lot of research, which was great fun. But when I finished the first draft of the book, I knew that I could not publish it without somebody with some sort of professional knowledge on the subject going over it and correcting my mistakes, because they're bound to be mistakes. And I just went to a what's called social media known as LinkedIn, which I'm a big fan of. It's a profession, for people. It's meant to be for people looking for jobs, but it's turned into much more than that. And I just went looking for a Navy submariner officer, U.S. Navy submariner. And I found a guy who seemed to fit the bill. And I wrote him a note and asked him if he would be willing to have a look at my manuscript and tell me what he thought of it. And he said, send me the file, which was already very nice. And it turns out that this guy, who was about my age, was a retired U.S. Navy submarine captain of 3 different nuclear submarines, and a professor at the U.S. Naval War College, and the holder of a professorship chair there. I mean, if I had wanted to pick an expert, this would be the guy. And by pure chance, I came upon him. He's a wonderful man. We're on first name, very good basis, George. And George took the entire 280-page manuscript and went through it line by line, word by word, correcting, changing, saying, no, you don't say this, you say that. This is not the way you do it, you do that. No money requested, no money changed hands. He did it out of the goodness of his heart. And he turned what was probably a pretty lousy manuscript into what I think is a very nice book. So yeah, thanks are given to people who help. And, it's hard to write a really good book without a lot of help.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. Michael, I believe you had a question, if I'm not
Oh, he
mistaken.
doesn't get a chance. No.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Michael.
there's only comment on similarities and coincidences. We were also very different as students, and when I was at university, I took a lot of courses in German Lit. German was my first language, and all papers were written by hand. And my German professor at university returned one saying, "I can read it, but it's ugly." That was his comment. Because I think we both shared pretty lousy handwritings.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we both have a tendency to be terse. And when I finished my thesis, it was 28 pages long. And my advisor said, "They'll never take it. They want 100 pages. Put in some pictures." 72 pages of pictures, and they accepted it.
There you go.
Enough said.
Thank you so much, Michael. Does anyone have any final questions for Richard? Any final burning questions? Okay, if I may, Richard, I'd love you to end by, we're here, most of us are in the Maritimes, a few scattered around Canada. Do you mind sharing with us briefly what it's like right now in Israel? What's going on?
Chaos. Total chaos. Corona-wise, nothing else. Security, defense, and all that is very quiet. Nobody wants to rock the boat when all this corona business is going on. But the government can't make up its mind what it wants to do. Everybody wants to have it done their way. You have a government of 34 or 36 ministers and another 16 deputy ministers. I mean, how can you reach a decision this way? It's like, it's like the old story about what is a camel? It's a horse that was designed by a committee. They can't do anything right. I mean, they got it right before they formed this ridiculous government. It was all going well. And now it's gone all downhill ever since. I mean, we were at a point where the daily corona victims numbers were in the 10s and 20s. And we're up to 2,000 a day now. They wanted to install a corona czar, what they call a project manager here, who would be in charge of everything about dealing with it. And they found a sucker who is a really good choice. He's former head of the health ministry. He's the former head of the biggest hospital in Tel Aviv. Bright person, knows what he's talking about. And he said to them, "Okay, I'll take the job, but you got to let me do it." And he announced tonight he's not taking the job because he couldn't get the I can't remember my English anymore. He couldn't get the powers to do what he wanted to do. There was always going to be somebody on top of him. The health minister didn't want to let him do his job. This minister, total chaos.
Wow.
And it's hot and sticky. So this is Israel today.
I know I speak for your brother and for all of us to say that you're welcome here anytime.
Oh,
I think we've had
I'll be there.
0
I'll
cases
come tomorrow
in
morning
Atlantic
if we
Canada for the last little while. As I said, they're going to open up schools in Nova Scotia in September. So you always have an open invitation here.
Thank you very much. I mean, both my wife and I would love to come. We'd love to go see the grandchildren in the States, but it's no-fly zone.
Yeah. Anyways, I want to, Richard, on behalf of all of us here, I want to thank you so much. I know it's the middle of the night for you.
But it was a pleasure. Naomi,
waking
it was
up.
a real pleasure.
And for us as well. Thank you so much for sharing insights about your writing, your process, your life, Israel. We're so appreciative.
If I may, I don't know how you work these things, but you're welcome and encouraged to send an email or a WhatsApp message to everybody that participated with my email address, and anybody and everybody is welcome to write to me with questions or whatever. I love corresponding with my readers.
Wonderful. I will absolutely do that. Tomorrow I will send an email to all who are registered. I'll provide your information as well as some information about your books and your work. So thank you so much.
It was great fun. Thanks for having me.
If everyone on the
Good
call
night,
could please
everybody.
join me giving Richard a round of applause as he logs off.